Hey everyone, thanks for coming to today's differential reinforcement training, consequence strategies. You guys voted for it. We're going to present on it. I made a brand new PowerPoint with updated slides and information for you guys because I want to keep things fresh. I don't want the same training over and over again, so we're always going to try to make it better, new information, so you guys always walk away with something because we really appreciate your participation and being here today. So thank you so much. Today's training, like I mentioned, differential reinforcement or consequence strategies. And guys, this is what we want to put in our behavior support plan and what we want to do when. What are these strategies pinpointing? Before or after behaviors? After behaviors, right? So these are the strategies we use after behaviors are occurring, right? And we talked last week about antecedent strategies, what happens beforehand. Consequence strategies are what happens after behaviors. And these strategies will help you develop your behavior support plan, consequence strategies, and also they will help you in your work, working with individuals, working on behaviors of your own perhaps. You can use the same effective reinforcement strategies that we talk about today across all those areas. So please ask questions, please comment anything you have to share. We're going to get right into it today. And these are what we're going to review today. I made a little slide about this. We're going to teach ways to promote learning by living a healthy lifestyle. We're going to review the types of consequences. And we're going to review the types of differential reinforcement that you may use in your work. Okay, the first thing we're going to talk about is brain-derived neurotropic factor. Who's heard this before? Okay, Nadine.
Yeah, I was a neuroscience major.
Oh, very impressive. And you've heard of this?
Yeah.
And what do you know about it?
It's basically like the pathways and how like your brain changes, like kind of like going in from like either going from fight to flight, and how like the chemicals will pass through, and different like protein channels, and how kind of like your brain chemicals are like made up and how they change depending on scenarios.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
how your brain affects your behaviors without you even knowing.
right, well, that's an important part too. So what I know about it, and I'm not a neuroscience major like yourself, but what I've learned about it in the brief readings I've done, it's a protein that plays a crucial role in the brain, particularly in neurosurvival growth and plasticity, right? And what do we mean by plasticity? Well, it's the brain's ability to regrow and to learn. So what I've learned about it very simply is that when we have higher BDNF, our learning is expedited, right? We can make connections in our brains a lot easier than if we had lower BDNF. And it also, when we experience any kind of trauma to the brain, and not just physical trauma, but other types of trauma, our brain's able to repair and bounce back quicker. And the folks we work with are about 10 times more likely to experience trauma than a person without that disability. So it's essential for learning, memory, and various brain functions. So why is this important to learn about in a differential reinforcement training, do you think? It's trauma-informed care. And what are we trying to do with our work? We're trying to, well, not trigger people. We're trying to do what? Teach them, and they're learning, right? So if they have high levels of BDNF, our teaching goes that much further. When your brain cells get damaged or face stressful situations, BDNF protects them and helps them come back stronger. And it also promotes learning and growing. A lot of times in the past, like growing up, I mean, I used to hear, I don't know if you guys did, it was like the brain can't repair itself. You guys hear that before? But that is not true. What scientists are finding that the brain is very good at repairing itself, especially if we provide it the adequate environmental changes that are healthy for it. And that's what we're going to talk about next.
They say this is actually why people have like suppressed memories, that they actually lose traumatic memories it's like your brain purposely removing it from your memory so that it doesn't cause triggers.
Wow, that's really interesting. Wow, that's really cool. Really interesting. So there's ways that we can increase BDNF. And you guys may be reminded of some of these ideas. Exercise, enriched environments, getting adequate sunlight, being social, hanging out with friends, deep sleep, meditation, a low-carb diet, and managing stress. Right, Grace? And what do these remind you of? Some of these. Antecedent strategies.
Good job, Brandon.
Is that what he said? Thank you, Brandon. Yes, so antecedent strategies. So doing these things, programming some of these ideas into our VIPs' lives can be a great way to increase BDNF and would be great inclusions in your behavior support plan. Especially if we notice a VIP is not engaged in some aspect of these things. There's also food, drug supplements that can aid in this as well. Turmeric, which we know is a very healthy supplement. Dark chocolate. Yeah, up your game.
I love
Fatty fish, and there's many others. And please look it up yourselves, and you could do research yourselves to find out different things to increase BDNF. But many of these things are just kind of living a healthy lifestyle. It's things we already know, living a life on earth that are good for us. So things that are good for us are probably good for our brain, and what's good for our brain is going to help us learning. So I know this is a training on consequences, but these are kind of a lot of antecedents that we're kind of talking about here that are going to really supercharge our reinforcement strategies. Does anyone have any questions about BDNF? So we're going to talk about effective reinforcement. So these are things, we're going to move on to the next part of the training. The effective reinforcement are things that we can do after behavior is occurring to make reinforcement more effective, make learning more effective. So in our work, this is really important because we know antecedents are very effective in starting behaviors. But only strong consequences are going to be able to maintain behaviors throughout time. And many times we see that in our work. A new staff is appointed to a case, a new antecedent strategy is introduced, and we start seeing behavior improvements right away. But what we see is shortly after, those strategies start to fall by the wayside. And why is that happening is because reinforcement is not being delivered effectively. So these ideas are really going to help supercharge your reinforcement strategies. And you probably, if you sat through my supervisions week, you could have went through these with me already, but we're going to talk about them again. The first one is immediate. Reinforcement that's delivered, that's delayed, is not very effective to maintain behaviors. Reinforcement that's immediate is very effective to change behaviors. Does anyone have an example of this?
Like verbal praise.
Yeah, verbal praise after the behavior. Go ahead.
Sticker chart.
A sticker chart is a great way to deliver reinforcement immediately. What are other ways? Go ahead.
Edible reinforcement.
Edible reinforcements, perhaps, that we might put into place after behaviors occur that we could deliver immediately. How many times have we been on cases and we hear someone say, this person's not going to Knoebels on Friday because they had a problem behavior Monday? And this is apparent because staff would never engage in these kind of strategies. But what is the problem with that to change behavior?
The person isn't going to realize that because I did something on Monday, I can't go do something fun on Friday. You can't make that connection because it's not immediate.
Yes, and I want us to take the conscious mind out of these things because this radical behaviorists don't really pay too much attention to the conscious mind and really all about this automatic process of reinforcement. That our brain will make a strong connection when reinforcement's delivered immediately, whether we're aware of it or not, whether we're conscious of it or not. So delivering reinforcement immediately is a great way to maintain behaviors. Reinforcement that's delayed or in the future is not effective to maintain behaviors. Okay, so a lot of times our strategies, we want to pinpoint delivering immediate reinforcement. Distinct. The person needs to be aware of the reinforcement being given, or else it's not going to be affected. And that makes a lot of sense to me. You need to have the person's attention in order to deliver reinforcement. They need to be aware of that change in the environment. Descriptive. So many times when we're working with VIPs, we can fall into a trap where we're saying, good job, nice work, awesome job. I ran out pretty quick. What do we want to do when we think about being descriptive in our positive statements?
By telling them what they did good.
Yeah, telling them about the behavior that we enjoyed. So being descriptive in our praise can really jumpstart our effective reinforcement strategies. So not just good job washing your hands. I really like how you use the soap dispenser. Right? Preferred. I'm going to make sure I know what my VIPs prefer, so I can deliver those things for awesome behavior. Now, just because someone prefers something, does that mean it would serve as a reinforcement? No. What's the only way we know a reinforcement is happening?
The behavior stops or continues?
Yeah, the behavior, if it's reinforcement, we are likely to see the behavior maintain or increase over time. And that's the only way we know for sure. So we want to make sure we know what's preferred. Varied. Most people don't like to receive the same reinforcement over and over and over again. And can we relate to that? Does anyone have an idea of things in their life that after a little bit that we love, they start to become stale? Good example. Chipotle. When it opened up here, man, it was novel, it was fresh, it was a great antecedent that got us over there, right? And then we started going twice a week. Then we started going once a week.
Mike started going twice a week.
I started going 3 times a week. And then all of a sudden, we don't even go anymore. It's like, I don't even want that stuff anymore. So you can see how contacting the same reinforcement loses its luster. You might have heard variety is the spice of life. This is the effective reinforcement strategy they were referring to. And then finally, certain. Reinforcement that's delivered certainly after behaviors are much more likely to maintain behaviors than consequences that are uncertain. And I know I just talked about this yesterday with you, Jillian, but in the 90s, so I apologize, in the 90s, for the young folk that weren't kids in the 90s, you might not remember this, but in the 90s, no one wore their seatbelt. Right? No one wore their seatbelt. It wasn't a thing you did. You got in the car, you went, everyone was bouncing around. It was like a party in the car. No one wore their seatbelt. Right? It wasn't anything anyone did.
There was no little blinking alarm constantly.
Well, yeah, and that was like the intervention. So cars, people were getting hurt, people were getting killed, unfortunately, and this wasn't good for business for car companies, right? So car companies implemented an intervention in most new models. And what did they do? What kind of intervention did car companies implement to encourage people to wear their seatbelts? Yeah, the alarm, the beep beep. So what kind of strategy would that be for extra credit? Well, it's an antecedent strategy, but what kind of functional hypothesis statement might we subscribe to that?
You would check socially negative mediated, like
Yes.
you're trying to
So what?
get it to stop.
So what? Yeah. So what is it? Automatic.
Oh,
Automatic. Negative reinforcement.
I thought you were adding this. Okay, I get it.
Right? Because we hear an adversive beep. Not many people like that beep. Right? So when that's in place, and what do the car companies do? They encourage you to engage in a behavior, and then they take away the adversive. Right? Negative reinforcement. And what did that do to our behavior? Everyone's wearing their seatbelts. I get in my car and I don't even, and this is the part I want you guys to hit home. I don't even think about it anymore. I get in my car and I put on my seatbelt. I don't even remember doing it, right? So that intervention was very successful to maintain behaviors, right? You could turn on, well, yes, you could do other kind of things, or you could just wear your seatbelt.
that's why I say my dad says after 2 hours it stops beeping. Or you could just not go 2 hours.
I can't go 2 hours without
Yeah,
beeping.
so.
So guys, I really wanted to give you an example here about how car companies put some of these effective reinforcement strategies in, and now everyone is wearing their seatbelts. Pretty effective strategy on their part, right? And what did they do? They made sure that it's certain that every time I put on my seatbelt, the noise will be removed. Reinforcement's delivered immediately. As soon as I engage in the behavior, the beeping stops. I am much more likely to engage in putting on my seatbelt behavior because they have included effective reinforcement strategies into their behavior support plan for drivers. These are the same ideas that you need to put in your plan to make sure that your strategies are maintaining through time. And these are the categories that you can think about when developing those sections and working with your VIPs. Do you guys have any questions or anything to add? Does that make sense to you guys?
I like how you broke it down, too.
Thank you. Do you have any questions about these ideas? Anything you want me to review? Again, they're so important. So in your behavior support plan, guys, these are the ideas I'd like to see in them. And of course, individualized to our VIPs. All right, let's continue, please. So there's types of consequences that we need to be aware of in the ABA world. One is reinforcement, and we talk so much about that. These are the only strategies we typically use, are reinforcement strategies. And what do we mean by reinforcement? What does that mean?
The behavior is likely to occur again in the future.
Yes, that's all it means. The behavior is likely to occur again in the future. When we deliver the consequence occurring after the behavior, if we start to see that behavior happen again and again and again, that is reinforcement. That is what it means. So that is why we put things on graphs, to make sure that we see that visual analysis of the behavior increasing or maintaining. And we can suspect that the consequence is a reinforcing consequence, because different things are not reinforcing to some people and they are to other people. And we know that. When we talk about extinction, what are we talking about? A consequence could be, we could put a behavior on extinction, you might hear. What does that mean?
Reinforcement's not delivered on purpose.
Yeah, reinforcement's withheld, right? Yes, not delivered. What did you say, Miriam?
Isn't it that you want the behavior to stop?
Yes, you want the behavior to stop. So what extinction means is we're going to withhold the consequence. We're going to withhold reinforcement. Someone engages in a challenging behavior, we're going to withhold reinforcement from that behavior. And guys, I would caution you using extinction strategies because there's unwanted effects of extinction that we need to be aware of. Extinction-induced aggression, extinction-induced behavioral extinction bursts, where we see an increased rate in the behavior. And if someone's engaged in a problem behavior, using an extinction strategy would make things worse for a time. And working with our adults and working with families, withholding reinforcement is not the best option for that reason. Because we could be making things worse. And if the person can't handle it, they're likely to deliver reinforcement, shaping the behavior to be worse over time. So extinction strategies, we could use them to reduce behavior like Miriam said, but we need to be very cautious, and it has to be recommended by a BCBA to use that. Do not go out in the field and use extinction strategies because they are likely to make things worse. Yeah.
Can you differentiate extinction and punishment?
Yes. So that's the next thing we'll be talking about, punishment. Punishment. So what do we mean by punishment? We would never use punishment strategies, you're right. And punitive is a good word to mention here, right? That a lot of these punishment strategies could be punitive in nature, right? And punishment has the effect on behavior would decrease a behavior, the same as extinction. The problems with punishment is that there's a lot of problems with punishment, and we would never use punishment in our treatment, guys. Punishment is likely we're modeling, and we've been punished in our lives, right? And what are some of the punishments our parents gave us or our caretakers gave us growing up? Being grounded, sent to your room. What else?
Can't watch TV.
Loss of privileges, timeouts. What are some more extreme punishments? A beating? Yeah, I mean, exactly right. Yeah, I mean, these kind of adversive consequences, these painful consequences. And, we don't truly know if they're punishment or reinforcing until we see that effects on the graphs, because some people might be like to be sent to their rooms, right? They have a video game console, they need a break, so these kind of punishment things, we need to think, hey, they could be a reinforcing act. We don't know until we see it on the graph. But punishment, the problem with punishment is that a lot of times the people that dish out punishment, the learner or the VIP they're modeling punishing behaviors to the VIP. And then the VIP is learning great ways to punish other people. Right? So this modeling going on is not something that we would use, and we would really try to encourage families to not use these punishment tactics as well for that reason. And then what we tend to see is families engage in this punishment cycle, where the one person's punishing another person, then that person punishes back, and it goes on and on and on. And we see that frequently in our work. And that could be an effective punishment that we need to consider. So using reinforcement is our best choice, guys. And using reinforcement has that opposite effect. We're modeling what kind of behaviors? Positive, good behaviors that the VIP will then learn to do as well. We're going to help with our relationship. And that's the other problem with punishment. We're destroying relationships with using punishment. Reinforcement will improve our relationships and also use to increase behaviors that we'd like to see again. So what's the question you have after that spiel that I'm thinking about? What should we use for challenging behaviors? Reinforcement too. So what do we manipulate for with the reinforcement for a challenging behavior?
We increase the value of the reinforcement for the positive behavior that we want.
Yeah, and do what for the challenging behavior?
We decrease the value of that.
You're totally right, Carlin. We decrease the value of the reinforcement or the greatness of the reinforcement for a challenging behavior. And so, Mike, what you're saying is we reinforce challenging behaviors? Yes, we do. And why do we do that?
Because they're not going to want whatever reward as much if they're doing bad stuff as they would if they were doing good stuff.
Perhaps. The reason why we decrease the value for the challenging behavior and deliver reinforcement, because we're likely to see an increase in the challenging behavior delivering reinforcement. The thing we want to consider is that we avoid all the unwanted effects of extinction and punishment when we use reinforcement for challenging behaviors. And the way we manipulate it is like what Carlin said. We lower the value of reinforcement for the challenging behavior, and we supercharge the value of reinforcement for the alternative behavior that we're teaching. Give me an example of how we might do this in real life? Yeah, please.
So for a VIP, for example, who engages in inappropriate social interactions, for attention, let's say, they walk up to you, they automatically start speaking about some negative trauma or something that they were punished for in the past. You would kind of stop them where they're at and kind of redirect them right away, instead of giving them that attention for that specific topic. And next time when they walk up to you with a more positive interaction, you engage with them, give them that extra attention, give them praise for engaging with you that way.
Okay, yeah. And I think your first step, I would acknowledge that.
Yeah.
I would acknowledge that to the person and talk to them. And if someone was experiencing some kind of trauma from the past that they'd like to talk about, I might encourage them to go see a counselor or something like that as a proper intervention. Yeah. Okay. I was thinking of an example like a glass of water or a drink, right? Someone's very thirsty for a drink. They engage in hitting. We have a behavior where they're engaging in hitting to gain access to a drink. We also have a behavior that they could request a drink, right? How can we manipulate the consequences in this way to deliver reinforcement for both?
If they're hitting for a drink, they get water. If they're asking for a drink, they get Gatorade.
Yeah.
Ice water.
Yeah, and Andy was great with this with one of our VIPs, JS, right? And he's like, oh, when JS isolates, hits, engages in these verbal aggressive behaviors, he's going to get a water, right? He's going to get some water. But if he asks for it, waits, has waiting toleration, does all those things, Andy would come up, get some ice, put a little tiki umbrella in there, make it real nice, right? So we can see how we can increase the value. We're using reinforcement in both areas, but we're doing a lot better for when they're practicing the appropriate behavior. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later in the training once again. And we call this matching law, guys. That behavior is going to go with what you get. And we said this yesterday, Jillian, right? Most bang for your buck, right? I'll engage in the behavior that's going to give me the most bang for my buck. And we'll talk about ways to do this. Let's continue. So we're going to get into the differential reinforcement, what it is. So with differential reinforcement, they are consequence strategies. They are consequence strategies. We want to reinforce appropriate behavior or replacement behaviors while minimizing reinforcement for challenging behaviors. And we just talked a lot about that. And we're going to consider matching law at the end of the training. All right, let's continue. Types of differential reinforcement. Differential reinforcement of other behaviors. Differential reinforcement of incompatible behaviors. Differential reinforcement of alternative behaviors. And finally, differential reinforcement of high, low rate behaviors. We're going to talk about each one very briefly, but these are the strategies that we would put in our behavior support plan, individualized to your VIP. So the first one we're going to talk about is differential reinforcement of other behaviors. And guys, this was like the first one people used. This was like the onset. This differential reinforcement strategy has evolved over time. And this was the first one that was kind of developed. And it was typically used, and Diego hates when I say this, but it was used in like prison systems. Okay, I hate to say that, but it's true. This is where they started to use it. And what we're doing here is we're reinforcing the absence of the target behavior. So we identified a target behavior of verbal aggression. If this person goes so long without engaging in verbal aggression, we're going to dish out a reinforcing consequence. Reinforce for the absence of problem behavior for a specific time period. So how would this work in a prison, would you think? Time decrease? Oh, yeah. I mean, that would be awesome for them. Yeah, they could get out early. Yeah.
You could get out early if you don't have any infractions.
Yeah, good point. I didn't think of that one. Yeah, absolutely. So yes, you don't get into a fight. We're going to let you out early. Differential reinforcement of other behaviors. How about don't join a gang and we're going to give you money at the commissary, right? Don't get into a fight with your cellmate and we're going to give you extra time in the yard, right outdoors, right? I don't know. So what's the problem with this? Thinking about how reinforcement and the effective reinforcement strategies, what's the problem with this strategy, would you say?
You're not constantly with them, so how do you know they're not doing it?
Well, that could be, but we want to make sure that we are observing, that we observe that this behavior did not happen during this interval, because we could be, so we could be reinforcing problem behavior if we don't.
You could be, like, the problem behavior can occur directly right after the reinforcement. Like, if your time period's an hour, let's say you reinforce, oh, you've been doing so good, you reinforce it, and then 2 minutes later they have the problem behavior.
Yeah, post-reinforcement pause, we call that.
It doesn't give you a replacement behavior.
Yeah.
Teach you something appropriate.
So we're like, hey, don't join a gang and we're going to reinforce you. But they could have done other problem behaviors. And we're still applying reinforcement. We're still giving that ultimate reinforcement. So the other is really the key here. That we're reinforcing other behaviors. And what behaviors are we reinforcing? The behaviors that are happening when?
After.
Just prior to the consequence being given. Right? And that's the immediacy of reinforcement. Right? So it's like, hey, every Friday I'm going to give you, you're going to get this reward. We're reinforcing behaviors that are happening at that time on Friday. So we could use this strategy. I don't want to discount this strategy because it is an effective strategy, but we need to use it. Oh, reset time intervals. Sorry, it's a brand new PowerPoint for me. I'm still getting used to it. Reset time intervals if problem behavior occurs. Okay. We want to make sure we use it with other differential reinforcement strategies. So this could be a great strategy that we use, but we want to use it in concert with the other strategies. Okay, so we would not like to see this strategy on its own in our work. So then we move on to differential reinforcement of incompatible behaviors. And it's a great one. We reinforce the desired behavior that makes the challenging behavior impossible to occur. Does anyone have an example of this? We're going to reinforce a behavior. Go ahead.
You can put some, like, I know there's a client downstairs that would scratch people's arms a lot, and if you have something in their hands that maybe occupies their hands instead of having them scratch people, that could be incompatible.
Yes, I love that idea. So this person, who was that? No, I know who's speaking. Brandon? Sorry, your voice is a little muffled. I'm surprised I didn't know that. You better up your tech game, Kurlan. So we have a client on the floor, a VIP on the floor, AF, who's likely to scratch. And we may encourage AF to carry something in his hands that he enjoys carrying. It's going to prevent the scratching behavior from happening. And we've seen other strategies in the field that are similar. Nice hands. Nice hands, right? Nice hands is a differential reinforcement of incompatible behaviors strategy, right? Hands in your pocket. I was working with a kiddo, and he liked to touch other kids, like just a sensory thing. When he walked by, he did a little tap. So I came up with some differential reinforcement of incompatible strategies, and I was like, hey, let's encourage him to put his hands in his pockets while he's walking, right? The other thing I came up with in the natural environment, which I thought was cool, was a hall pass. I was like, in the hall, you have to carry the hall pass, right? And I made the hall pass kind of bigger. He had to carry this hall pass around in the hall, making that behavior incompatible. And we wouldn't always want to work on sensory behaviors, but since this involved another person and touching someone else is really a socially inappropriate behavior, it was something that we deemed worthy of working on. And these strategies were highly successful. Does anyone have, I think there's a little bit more here. Select a desired behavior that's in the VIP skill repertoire. make sure that they can do the skill we're trying to teach. And if they already have it in their repertoire, they already could do it, we're on the right track. And this is another example. Picking skin, and we're going to reinforce using a fidget spinner. We're going to occupy those hands. A lot of these things are occupying the hands, right? An example that's not talking about hands is and I know John McElwee gave this example in the previous training. It was, we're going to reinforce sitting in a seat, and it makes getting out of your seat incompatible, right? That behavior is impossible when you're sitting in the seat. You can't be eloping and running around the room. Does anyone have any questions about incompatible behavior? Does that make sense, what we're putting down with this idea? So guys, use it in your work. I want to see it in behavior support plans too. Differential reinforcement of low or high rate behavior. And this is just a decrease or increase the overall frequency of behavior, but not eliminate, right? So some behaviors happen in high frequency that could be maladaptive, that we don't want to eliminate because they're good behaviors, but they're occurring in behavioral excess way too often. So we would want to decrease it to a more appropriate rate. What's a behavior that describes that, can you think of? Yeah, teeth brushing. That's a great example. Yeah, so we have a VIP who brushes their teeth far too often, and Nadine did an excellent job helping this VIP reduce the teeth brushing. And when he was brushing his teeth, it was such a problem. It was like blood everywhere. It was like a scene out of CSI in that bathroom. Right? So we are reinforcing, and what did we do? You tell us, Nadine. You are the expert on this case.
Well, he started at 3 hours. He was doing it for 2 to 3 hours, but only at nighttime. And in the morning, he would do it. So we had to determine why was he brushing for an appropriate time in the morning, but not at night. So we found that mom kind of nagging him outside of the bathroom. He would just keep going and going and going to be passive aggressive towards mom. So once we removed mom from the equation, set in a timer, and then we set up a routine. So when the timer first got introduced, once the timer went off, we would wait for him to independently start rinsing, but then if he wouldn't, then we would increase our prompting based on what he needed. At first, I would start outside of the bathroom, but then if he kept brushing, then I would step into the bathroom, have him make eye contact with me, break his concentration, and then he'd start rinsing. Once he was able to stop brushing with just a verbal prompt from outside the bathroom, then we started decreasing the time on the timer. So now we're at 5 minutes and no prompting at all is provided. I just sit outside the bathroom. When the timer goes off, he turns around, lets me know the timer's going off, because he's not to touch the timer because he breaks them. So I go in and take the timer off and he starts rinsing.
Nice work.
And I withhold praise until he comes out and documents it on his data sheet.
Nice job. Excellent work. Yeah, great work. And that's what we're speaking about. Brushing teeth isn't a bad behavior, but we want to reduce. Brushing too often in duration is. So we would want to reduce that duration. What's a behavior that occurs not enough that we might want to increase or see more of? Yeah, showering. I was thinking hygiene too. Like showering, right? Like this behavior occurs not often. So I'm going to apply reinforcement as we're moving up and we're seeing this behavior occur more and more often throughout the week. So we can also provide reinforcement for low or high rates of behavior. Okay, any questions on this strategy? Okay, and then finally, that I'm going to spend a little bit more time on is differential reinforcement of alternative behaviors. Let's go. So this is where we're going to pick a replacement behavior that leads to the same function as the problem behavior. And we're going to heavily reinforce the desired behavior. I'm going to make that desired behavior's consequence the best thing. I'm going to throw a party when we see that alternative behavior happen. We're going to minimize reinforcement for the challenging behavior, and we talked about ways to do this. Behavior must lead to the same function or result as the challenging behavior, right? So if they have challenging behaviors to get a drink, we want to make sure the alternative behavior gives them access to a drink, right? Behavior must be less effortful than the challenging behavior. So consider the VIP's skill repertoire. We want to make sure that the VIP is able to engage in the alternative behavior with little to low effort, little to no effort. And we're going to look at the matching law. Does anyone have any questions of differential reinforcement alternative behavior? And guys, on our behavior support plan, a lot of times a target behavior for strengthening is an alternative behavior that we are replacing the challenging behavior with. Sorry, we went through that side too. So guys, remember, heavily reinforced desired behavior. Minimize reinforcement for challenging behavior. Behavior must lead to the same function or result as the challenging behavior. So what do we really need to make sure of with this? That we know what? Know the function for the challenging behavior. We need to make sure we know the function, because we wouldn't be able to come up with an alternative if we didn't know why those behaviors were happening. Behavior must be less effortful than challenging behavior. And sometimes, guys, you can make the problem behavior more effortful for the person to complete. And that could be a good strategy to use too, if you can make the behavior more effortful than the replacement behavior we're trying to teach. How might we do that? You know, I was thinking about the flushing like all kind of stuff down the toilet. Right? And there's like a garbage can next to the toilet. They're like taking stuff out, flushing it down, right? So I might do what with the garbage can? Move it further away. And I'm going to put what in their area? And this is why it's we've done this with a case. We gave them a little packet of 3 wipes or whatever they needed. So now that's super available, less effort. And now we have something that's super more effort across the room. What is that person likely to do? Probably the alternative behavior that we're promoting. So in this example, we really made the problem behavior more effortful to complete, while providing an alternative that was much easier to complete. And the last slide here, guys, is the matching law. And guys, this is what I'm thinking about when thinking about replacing challenging behaviors, the matching law. Have you guys ever heard of this? So the matching law dictates that relative response rates will match relative reinforcement rates. So what does that mean? In a more common term.
The more you reinforce a positive behavior, the more likely it is to happen.
Yes.
And the less reinforcement you give to a challenging behavior, the less likely it is.
Yeah. So we're home, right? We're home. We have a ton of reinforcing activities we could engage in any moment at the house. We could read a book. We could watch a TV show. We could scroll on our phone. What provides the most reinforcement is what we're going to gravitate towards in that moment, right? So how many people, and think about exercise. Exercise, why is it so hard to maintain exercise for people? What was it?
Getting there is the hardest part.
Like losing weight? Is that what you mean?
No, like just getting.
Oh, getting to the gym?
Is the hardest part.
Okay, yeah, okay, I see what you mean. Sorry, what was that online?
You won't see the results right away.
You won't see the results right away. Who is that? Jackie, thank you. Yeah, you won't see the results right away. So the reinforcement isn't provided immediately when you go to the gym, right? It's very delayed, right? So those behaviors are much less likely to be maintained over time, right? So that's why we see exercise, and we all know exercise is good for you. It's very good for your mind. We talked about BDNF. It's very good. It's great for your body. It's great all around. Why aren't people engaging in it more often is probably because the reinforcement is not immediate and it's not certain. And it takes a lot of time to reach those goals. And we'll talk more about goals and contacting reinforcement in that training. But we want to make sure, I think that's it. I don't think there's anything. Is there anything else on here? Oh, here's another example. When someone spends more time watching TV than exercising, even though, and we just talked about exercising, even though they know exercising is healthier, right? So we're going to gravitate towards behaviors that provide the most reinforcement or the most bang for our buck automatically, right? So when we're teaching an alternative behavior or we're using any of the differential reinforcement strategies, if we're not seeing the VIP engaging in them, if we don't see that this behavior is maintaining over time, we need to think about ways to increase our reinforcement value, right? We need to be a source of reinforcement for that individual so they will continue to practice that alternative behavior. When we see antecedents come in, they're very effective to start behaviors. If behaviors do not maintain through time, it's a problem with reinforcement. Refer to this training. Talk to your BCBAs. Think about these ideas when you're working with your VIPs. And this will help behaviors that we are teaching maintain over time and make our jobs easier and the lives of our VIPs that much better. Do you guys have any questions for me today? Was this training useful? Did you guys learn something today? Are you guys thinking about VIPs when I'm talking? That you're going to use these strategies on? That my work here is done. Thank you guys very much.